The leak. The water dripped steadily onto the hardwood floor, and Caroline Hayes stood beneath it with a bucket in her hands, watching each drop fall like a metronome, counting down the remaining seconds of her marriage. She did not know this yet, but her body sensed it. Something in the way the stains spread across the ceiling felt permanent and irreversible. She had called Michael 3 times that morning. His phone went to voicemail each time. She left no messages because after 13 years of marriage, she had learned that her problems felt smaller when spoken aloud to silence. Michael was somewhere in Georgia, building a shopping center for money that went into an account she barely accessed for a life they barely lived anymore. The bucket filled slowly, and Caroline thought about her mother, who always said that a leaking roof was the fastest way to lose a house. Her mother had been talking about literal roofs, but Caroline wondered if the same applied to the other kind. At 38 years old, Caroline Hayes felt like she was slowly disappearing. She had been someone once, a woman with dreams and laughter and a warmth that made people lean in close. She still had those things, locked somewhere inside her, but they had been gathering dust for so long that she could barely remember what it felt like to access them. Her son Marcus was 12 now, old enough to notice that his parents existed in the same house but different worlds, old enough to retreat to his room and pretend everything was fine. She called the hardware store, and they recommended Ryan Cooper. They said he was reliable and thorough and good with people. Caroline made the appointment for Thursday afternoon. The night before, Michael came home. He did not kiss her hello. He set his work boots by the door and collapsed onto the couch. The house smelled like his exhaustion and diesel fuel. She almost mentioned the roof, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the way he closed his eyes before she even spoke. Maybe it was knowing that he would make a face like she was asking too much of him. Thursday arrived cold and gray. Ryan Cooper showed up at 2 o'clock in a truck that was cleaner than most people's living rooms. He was taller than she expected, and his eyes were kind in a way that made her nervous. He wore a faded baseball cap and moved with the confidence of someone who had never questioned whether he belonged anywhere. "Hi, Mrs. Hayes. I am Ryan. I hear you've got yourself a situation up there." Caroline felt something shift in her chest, something small and fragile that terrified her. It was recognition not of Ryan, but of herself. The part of her that had been sleeping for years seemed to stir at the sound of another human being speaking directly to her with genuine interest. She showed him the leak. She explained where the water came from and when it started. She gave him too many details about the ceiling and the foundation and the history of the house. Michael had bought it after they got married. They were so happy then. We thought we would be. Ryan listened. He really listened. Not the way people listen while thinking about what they will say next, but the way someone listens when they genuinely want to understand. He looked up at the ceiling and then back at her and said, "It will be fine. We will fix this." Something in those 6 words broke a dam inside Caroline, and she felt tears starting to build behind her eyes, and she did not know why.
The first crack. Ryan worked on the roof for 3 hours that afternoon, and Caroline found herself inventing reasons to be outside. She brought him water that he did not ask for, and lemonade that she suddenly decided to make. She stood on the porch watching him move across the shingles with practiced ease, and tried not to think about how long it had been since anyone had noticed her. When he came down, he had dirt on his face, and his shirt was damp from sweat. He smiled at her like she was the most interesting person he had ever met, and Caroline realized that no one had looked at her that way in years. "I found the problem," he said, following her inside to the kitchen. "The flashing around the east side is shot, but the good news is you caught it early. I can order the materials and be back next Wednesday to finish the job properly." Caroline nodded but felt a flutter of something she could not name. Anticipation, maybe? Or dread? She offered him coffee, and he said yes, and they sat at her kitchen table, while outside, the sky turned darker. He asked her questions about the house, and she answered. He asked where she was from originally, and she told him about growing up in Charlotte. He asked if she liked living in North Carolina, and she paused, because no one had ever asked her what she wanted before. They had just assumed she would go along with everything. "I used to," he said. "I grew up here in Raleigh. My parents still live about 20 minutes away. I moved to Charlotte for work, for a relationship that did not work out, and then I came back because I realized I was happier when I was home." Caroline listened to him talk about his life, and she felt something dangerous blooming inside her. It was not attraction exactly, though there was that too. It was recognition, the sense that this man saw the world the way she did, that he understood something about longing and about the way people could be in the wrong life and keep pretending anyway. When Michael got home 3 days later, he was angry about the roof. He did not want to spend the money. He said it could wait another month or two, and Caroline felt the familiar weight of her own desires being pushed down and away. But something in her had shifted, and it did not shift back. The following Wednesday, Ryan returned with materials and a plan. He worked with focus and precision and took breaks to talk to her. She found herself changing into better clothes that morning, wearing the perfume she had bought a year ago and never used, telling herself it was just politeness. As the afternoon wore on, the clouds rolled in and the light turned gray and strange. Ryan was finishing the last shingle when the power went out. The whole neighborhood went dark, and there was suddenly only the two of them in the dim living room, surrounded by the kind of silence that felt alive and dangerous. "Are you okay?" he asked, and his voice sounded different in the darkness. Softer, maybe. "Yes, I'm fine." He climbed down from the ladder and stood in the living room, and the rain started to fall harder against the windows, and Caroline knew that this moment meant something. She knew that she was standing at a crossroads and that whatever happened next would matter. Ryan looked at her, and she looked at him, and the distance between them suddenly felt both impossible and inevitable.
The line. Caroline crossed the room in 3 steps, or maybe it was 2. She did not remember walking. She only remembered that suddenly they were close enough to touch, and that she was reaching for his face, and that his hands were gentle when they found her waist. "I have been so alone." Ryan did not move away. He did not pretend he did not understand. He kissed her like he had been waiting to do it forever, and Caroline felt something come alive inside her that she thought was dead. That night, they did not go all the way, but they went far enough to cross a line that Caroline knew with absolute certainty she could never uncross. Over the next 6 weeks, their affair became a secret language, spoken in moments stolen between his appointments and her volunteer work at Marcus's school. They met at a hotel outside of town 3 times. Ryan did not try to hide the depth of his feelings. He told her that he was falling in love with her, and Caroline wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this was real and that it meant something and that somehow the universe would reorganize itself to make it okay. "This is crazy." "I know," Ryan said, and he was lying next to her in a darkened room, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "But it is also the most real thing I have felt in years." Caroline felt alive in a way she had not felt alive since before marriage, before responsibility, before time had worn her down into this exhausted replica of herself. She felt seen. She felt wanted. She felt like maybe she was going to survive this life after all. Michael noticed something changing. He asked if she was seeing someone, and she lied, and he did not push it. Their marriage had been crumbling for so long that maybe he did not want to know the truth. Maybe discovering it would force him to decide what to do, and staying numb was easier than choosing. She told Ryan that they could not keep doing this, and he agreed, but they kept doing it anyway. They existed in this bubble of denial where nothing outside mattered, and inside was just the two of them and this impossible, beautiful thing they had built. Then, on a Tuesday in October, Marcus found a text message on the bathroom counter where Ryan had accidentally left his phone, an address of the hotel. He had saved their conversation under the name Brian. She heard Marcus crying in his room, and she felt the ground beneath her feet disappear entirely.
The shattering. Marcus would not look at her when she tried to explain. He sat on his bed with his arms crossed, and his face had transformed into something she did not recognize. A shield made of anger and betrayal, and the particular kind of devastation that only a child can feel when the parent they trusted reveals themselves to be a stranger. "How could you?" he said, and his voice was so small and so ancient all at once. "How could you do this to Dad?" Caroline tried to touch his shoulder, and he flinched away from her like her hands were something toxic and burning. She realized in that moment that she had destroyed something far more precious than her marriage. She had fractured her relationship with the only person who had ever loved her without condition. Michael found out an hour later from Marcus, who could not keep the secret because keeping secrets was what had poisoned everything already. Michael came home to find Caroline in their bedroom, and the look on his face was something between rage and heartbreak and a kind of numb acceptance, like on some level, he had always known this was coming. For months he had been distant and preoccupied, and she had blamed him for not fighting for their marriage, but now she understood that sometimes when someone stops fighting, it is because they have already surrendered. They have already accepted that you are slipping away and there is nothing they can do to hold you. "I am sorry. I am so sorry." Michael sat down on the edge of the bed and he did not yell. He did not throw things. He simply looked at her with an expression of such profound sadness that it was somehow worse than any rage could have been. "With a handyman, Caroline?" he said, and his voice was hollow. "Like you could not even make it interesting. You had to destroy everything for someone so absolutely ordinary." The divorce moved forward with mechanical efficiency. Their lawyer was a sharp woman named Patricia, who barely looked at Caroline. She handled the paperwork with the efficiency of someone who had seen this story 1,000 times before. The house was sold, the furniture divided, the 16 years of marriage reduced to spreadsheets and custody agreements. Ryan called constantly at first, then less frequently, then not at all. When Caroline finally got him on the phone weeks later, his voice sounded different, scared almost. "I cannot do this," he said over the crackling line. "I thought I wanted this, but I cannot be the reason your whole life fell apart." "You already are." Caroline moved into a small apartment in Durham. The walls were bare and the silence was deafening. She had imagined that freedom would feel like joy, but instead it felt like erasure. Like she had burned down her entire life to discover that the thing she was running toward did not actually exist. Michael filed for full custody of Marcus, and the judge granted it without hesitation. Caroline got weekends and Wednesday dinners, but Marcus barely spoke to her. He looked at her like someone he used to know, someone he had loved before she became a person capable of this kind of destruction. She thought of Ryan sometimes, but mostly she tried not to. She thought instead of the person she had been before the repair, the person who had stood under a leaking roof and waited for someone to fix her without understanding that you cannot fix yourself by breaking everything around you.
What remains? 6 months later, Caroline sat in the office of a therapist named Dr. Sarah Chen, who did not judge her, but also did not make excuses for her. The woman was direct in a way that felt almost cruel, but probably was just honest. "You are not a bad person," Dr. Chen said in their 4th session, "but you made bad choices, and there is a difference. The bad choices came from a place of pain, but pain does not erase responsibility." Caroline nodded and took it in. This was harder than forgiveness would have been, harder than condemnation, harder than anything, because it meant accepting that she was both the victim of her circumstances and the architect of her destruction. She started volunteering at a community center, teaching art classes to kids who needed after-school programs. She was not trying to fix anything anymore. She was just trying to be useful in small ways, in quiet ways. She was trying to become someone she could live with. Marcus turned 13 without her, and she missed his birthday. But she wrote him a letter that he did not answer. She kept writing letters anyway. Once a month, she sat at her kitchen table and poured out things she could never say to his face. Things about how sorry she was, and how she knew sorry was not enough, and how she understood if he never forgave her.
One Wednesday evening, Marcus showed up at her apartment for dinner, and he looked taller and harder than she remembered. He sat across from her at the small table, and they ate the pasta she had made in silence. And then he said, "I read your letters. I am glad." "I am not okay with what you did," he said, and he was right. He was supposed to say this, and she was supposed to accept it. "I might never be okay with it, but I am trying to understand it." It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was something smaller and more fragile and somehow more real than anything she had felt during the affair. It was the possibility that maybe over time they could build something new, not a replacement for what was broken, but something different, something that acknowledged the damage and continued anyway. She thought of Ryan sometimes, and she had heard through mutual friends that he was back with his ex-girlfriend, that he had married her last spring, that he had 2 stepchildren and seemed happy, or at least seemed to have moved on in a way that Caroline could not. She did not hate him anymore. She did not feel much of anything when she thought of him except a kind of tired recognition. He had been the door she walked through, but he was not the answer to anything. He was just a man, and she was just a woman, and they had both been lost in different ways. The roof of the house that Michael still lived in would eventually need repairs again, and Caroline imagined that he would hire someone else, someone who would not remind him of the day everything changed. Or maybe he would fix it himself, slowly, over time, in the way that people rebuild their lives, one shingle at a time. Caroline was learning to forgive herself, not because she deserved it, but because the alternative was to carry this weight forever. And she was tired of carrying weight. She was tired of disappearing. She was tired of waiting for someone else to fix her. So she started the long and lonely work of fixing herself.